Hello everybody, my name is Laura Urresta. I'm a FastTIMES volunteer, and for today's interview we are going to be with Dwain Butler. He was part of the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center, also U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and also Science and Technology Corps. He's actually the president of the AGC, Applied Geophysics Consultancy. So let's hear what he has to say about his career in geophysics and also his new book completion. How did you start in your career as a geophysicist?
Well, I come from a background of physics. I had both a bachelor's and master's in physics, but I did get a strong introduction to geology and geophysics as an undergraduate. So when an opportunity opened up 3 years into my career with the federal government, U.S. federal government, I transitioned to a job with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Nebraska. And it was with a group that had just finished designing the NORAD facilities at Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. And so we were really interested in soil and rock mechanics and the use of geophysics to determine physical properties of soil and rock. So it was kind of a natural transition into near-surface geophysics. We developed a borehole geophysics program when I was working in Nebraska for the Corps of Engineers. And then about 3 years later, 2 years later actually, transferred to what was then the Waterways Experiment Station, and is now the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center. And originally worked in soil and rock mechanics and using geophysics in soil and rock mechanics. And then transferred into a division that was specifically devoted to applying geophysics to the near surface.
So, what are the most important moments for you as a geophysicist in your career? Can you tell me some of your highlights?
Some of the highlights, I think, we always tried to develop correlations of geophysical properties to soil and rock mechanics properties that were of interest to whoever was sponsoring our work. The areas that I worked in that I would consider highlights would be the detection of cavities, tunnels, and underground facilities. And this work, of course, involved areas like site investigations in karst areas, where you would have sinkholes and cavities, which might be air-filled or water-filled or clay-filled. And we also looked for intrusion tunnels in Korea and intrusion tunnels along the southwest border. So that whole area of cavity tunnel and underground facilities detection extended throughout my whole career, starting about 1980, ancient history. Another area that I've worked in for many decades was the area of water supply, and in particular trying to locate water well locations. One of the most memorable projects that comes to mind is 6 weeks that I spent in Korea, and we were looking at initially at 6 sites along the Han River, just simply mapping stratigraphy. In other words, the depth to top of rock for planning of locks and dams for the future. And then we went to a U.S. Air Force base and concentrated on locating well sites. They had some wells that produced good potable water and good supply, and other areas where wells had gone dry. So we were looking at trying to develop in a number of locations preferable drilling sites for water wells. Also did a lot of work throughout about maybe 3 decades working on problems for the Environmental Protection Agency and a U.S. Department of Defense research program called SERDP, Strategic Environmental Research Program. And the objective there was to detect contaminants in the subsurface. I had one memorable project for the Environmental Protection Agency trying to map seepage paths around swine lagoons. Now, that wasn't exactly the most pleasant task, but it was a relatively easy task because any leakage from the swine lagoons would be easily detectable by the electromagnetic methods that we were using. Two of the projects that I recall over the decades that are still most memorable to me were those 6 weeks that we spent in Korea that I described earlier. And then we also went to Egypt on a joint military exercise with the Egyptian army. And the objective there was to find water well locations. So those were two really memorable projects that I had.
I know you published a book this year. It is called Completion.
Yes.
So what has the role of writing has played in your career as a geophysicist?
Well, I've always said that writing is an integral part of geophysics. You know, I've already indicated some of the ways that we might tailor the writing to a specific audience. But it's hard to understand how you could be a geophysicist without also being a writer. In fact, my daughters used to ask me, what do we tell our friends that you do? And rather than try to go into any great detail, I would frequently tell them to just tell their friends that I was a writer. So writing is both necessary and a logical thing for geophysicists to be doing. Most of the writing that I've done over the years has been technical. And one of the writing challenges for me has been in going from third person to first person. The third type of writing that I started doing around 2000 or the end of the 1990s was writing op-eds. I published these in the Leading Edge of the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. And in the op-eds, of course, they're expressing opinions, and sometimes they're just describing happenings, not necessarily opinions. But the difficulty there was going from third person to first person. I would write them using I instead of it. The book that you referenced, Completion, toyed with a lot of the concepts in that book for years. Even though the book is relatively short, I kept thinking I can make this longer if I just elaborated in this section, but I didn't. I just wrote what came out of them, what flowed, and so it's relatively short, but it's ideas that I had thought about for many years, and a lot of the aspects of the book have to do with mythologies of various civilizations. If we look at commonalities between the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Egyptian civilization and the Hebrews, there are a lot of commonalities. And a lot of times I think that those commonalities may indicate, and this is said on the back or in the preface to the book, that I really feel those might refer to actual events that happened in prehistoric times that became ingrained in the human consciousness and just evolved over time, and we still remember them today, but they may be quite a bit different from what the actual prehistoric event was. So that's kind of the theme of the book Completion, is looking at a series of these either mythological events over time, finally leading up to the two main characters of the book arriving in Egypt on the Giza Plateau and concentrating on looking around and beneath the Great Sphinx.
So I know you told me early that all these ideas of the book has been in your mind for a long time. But what pushed you to write the book? I mean, was it this year, or how long has been those ideas that push you to write the book?
It's been longer than that, and I don't want to even admit it's embarrassing how long I put off finishing it. But I've always said the most difficult aspect of writing anything, whether it's an article for a technical journal or a technical report for the government or your sponsor, is getting the first line down. So I got the first line down and had a concept of how I wanted to proceed several years ago. It's kind of embarrassing. But then I did finally finish it up about last July, August timeframe. And so that's when I said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and submit this to. I was unable to get an agent or a known publisher. So I did self-publish the book. So it came out in October, I think.
Okay, well, that's amazing that you published the book by yourself. That's very impressive. So there is something I really want to know, and maybe other people want to know. And are you thinking in write another book?
Well, yes and no. One of my previous ventures into what might be called fiction, it's sort of a combination of fact and fiction, was a book called Einstein Redux. And in it, it traces the travels of I should have had it just to hold it up, a little Einstein doll, a stuffed doll that's about this tall, that my older daughter gave me, and expected probably that I would put it up on a shelf and that I might have put it on my desk for a while and then stick it away in the closet somewhere. But actually, I carried the Einstein doll to work, and a bunch of friends who I was working with had the idea of stealing the little Einstein doll and taking the doll on trips with them. So the Einstein doll literally traveled around the world. So the original Einstein Redux book probably only covers about, I don't even count, maybe 50 of those 1,000 or more pictures. I had the idea that maybe I should do a second one, Einstein Redux 2, but I haven't proceeded on that. I've got to firm up those ideas. And another idea for a fiction book, and again, I haven't outlined it very well, but to look at what might be happening to the Earth as Antarctica and Greenland losing a lot of mass, melting glaciers, and also the melting permafrost. Build a fiction book around what might be found beneath this melting ice and permafrost. And they've already made some astounding finds, but particularly beneath the permafrost. So anyway, those are about the only ideas I have for a follow-on book, and whether or not I'll have the drive and the energy to do it is another question entirely.
Thank you so much for your time and that you had the chance to give me this interview.
You bet. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.